So we are now on Daf Ayin Hey Amud Bet. We read the Mishnah yesterday, and we're going to continue on with the with the Gemara, which is great. So we together. So the Mishnah, just to briefly summarize the Mishnah, we're talking about the fact that a ditch works basically the same way that a wall did, and saying that in terms of the fact that if it's 10 tefachim deep and 4 tefachim wide, then it serves to differentiate fully between 2 yards. And if you have a bridge over the gap, then they can be connected again. If you whether that be having a bridge, it has to be at least 4 tefachim wide. It's either whether it be a bridge over the ditch or it's a bridge between 2 balconies that are more than 4 tefachim apart, as long as because the bridge itself has to be at least 4, and then you can use that as a bridge, and it can connect them if you'd like them to be connected. Again, so we just finished the Mishnah on Daf Hey Amud Bet yesterday, and now we're on the Gemara. So we're going to discuss the question of when we're filling in the ditch, how do we fill it in totally, and why in some cases is it considered filled in, and why not? So the Tevin Lo Chayitz, and since when do we say that hay isn't considered to be a full filling in of the location? V'ha'anan Tanan met ben shtei zero gavoa sar tzachim marvin shnayim v'lein marvin echad. What do you mean that if you fill in the hole with hay, it's not good? If you had a giant hay bale or hay pile, I guess, haystack. That was the word I was looking for. In between courtyard, then it's more than 10 tefachim tall. And that's considered to be a wall. So what do you mean that you can't use it to fill in a ditch? You're right. If you're trying to make a wall of straw is just fine. Aval le'inyan chatzitza batle chayitz filo batle lo chayitz. No, but when we're talking about filling in a ditch, it only nullifies it only will serve to fill it in if you intended to leave it there, right? If you decided that you wanted to fill up the ditch forever using straw, that'd be fine. Or using hay or straw, that'd be fine. But if you're planning on taking it later to feed your animals, then you can't consider that to be a filled-in ditch. So another option. We mentioned the Mishnah. How else could you fill it in? If not, being a straw, you fill it in using dirt or pebbles. So Malay Afar. What's wrong, right? You filled it in with dirt or with pebbles. So Vafilu Bistama. Wait, so we just mentioned the fact before that you had to intentionally leave the hay in there. So does the same thing apply to the dirt and the stones? What if I wanted to use them later for something else? So Hatanan, Beit Shemilu Teven Otzrarot Ubidlu Batel. So didn't we learn in Mishnah elsewhere in Ahilot by Tuma? Okay, we're here. If you let me just show your diagram. So if somebody passed away, generally there's a concept of then the body becomes an avatuma, and then we say that the tuma permeates and goes straight up. Right? So anybody on top of a dead body will then become tummy themselves. If they are enclosed in a structure, then everything inside of said structure is tameh mishum tumat ohel. Right? So let's say let's say somebody passed away, so they're lying here on the floor. And in the room, if there's any other kalim, any other utensils, then they will be tameh in the room. Also, similarly, if there was something, say, if somebody had been walking directly on top of it, it would also be tameh. So the question is if you were to have filled in the whole area with stones or with stones stones or hay, with that, you leave it there, so then we would say that it's no longer considered to be any source of break between the two, because generally would say that an ohel will stop the it'll stop the tomb from going straight up forever. It'll be limited only to directly above with the person standing right on top of it. not past that point. Meaning, if you're standing there, that'd be a problem. If let's say if you were, level on top of that, it would not be a problem. So that would be the question. The implication there is that it only works in terms of the only case when we say that you're having filled in the ground will leave the whole area batel. Here, it's also if it's filled in, but ohel goes away. There's two tuma going on here. There's one tuma is the tuma of the vertical transference of tuma. There's also that it'll fill out the space. So if the space is empty, the tuma fills out. It goes to the left, it goes to the right, it goes into the whole structure over here. But if it's filled in, right? Let's say if you all right, somebody let's say there's there's two pits. One pit has a dead body in it, and then one pit to the right has you're standing in it. I don't know why you're standing in the pit. Let's say you are, you're fine. Right? There are two. There's a person who's passed away was on one side of the pit, you're on the other side of the pit. You're not tamei. But if somebody puts a roof over you over the top, then you are tamei. But on the other hand, let's say if there had been a clear little olive, so that if this area is all filled in, if the area here is empty, that means that this utensil here is going to be tamei because of tumat ohel. Sorry for the quick crash course in tumat tara. But if it's all filled in, then tumat ohel goes away, and the only thing we have left is that the tuma going straight up, but it will not go horizontal anymore to catch this utensil over here. Okay, so that's what we're saying is that if you filled it in, here we're seeing that bittul is relevant, meaning that you have to have filled it up with and then intentionally left it there. But if you only filled it up temporarily and plan to take the straw out later, then tuma would be the internal laws of tuma would be unaffected, and we would pretend that this isn't even there. All the straw or the pebbles you filled in the structure with. Okay, a bit low in, low, bit low. So again, implication of that statement is if you had done bittul, it would negate it. If not, then it would not. Amar Huna, Montana Oholo, Rabbi Yossi. So then Rav Huna says, who is the Stam Tana who taught us the entirety of Masechet? Oholo or Ahilo, again, that's a Zogish Machlok on how you pronounce it, and various here. So again, Rabbi Donnie Wolf, who wrote a book on Oholot, on Ahilot, this is Ahilot. You're welcome to do whichever one you feel comfortable with. I will not judge. So, right. So the one who taught that Masechet? So the answer is Rabbi Yossi taught it. Rabbi Yossi, it should be done. No, but if it's Rabbi Yossi, it should be the opposite then, because we learned it from Rabbi Yossi. That Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Yossi taught us in another brayta that Teven ve'enatid la'afaroto. If you have hay and you're not moving it in the future, hooray, hu kistam afar batel, and it's considered to be like any old dirt, and it's batel, and therefore it is considered to be there and a valid partition, and that's it. Afar v'atid lafaroto, but if there's dirt and you plan on moving it, hooray, hu kistam teven lo batil. But dirt, if you attempt to move it, then it considers to be a case of hay, and therefore it is not batel, right? I mean, so therefore it wouldn't be considered to be affect anything in terms of the Tara in this case. So, Elam Rabbi Asi. So what did Rabbi Asi say? Montana Eruvin. So who is our main? Who's the person who taught us about this concept? Rabbi Yossi. It's Rabbi Yossi. So this is Rabbi Yossi who so similarly we got Rabbi Yossi doing both things, right? So Rabbi Yossi seems to be holding both, and he seems to have different cases: one for Shabbos and one for Hilchot Shabbos and one for Hilchot Ahilot, right? So two different areas, yet he has and with two different opinions. So similarly, this is a problem that he's holding on both sides of the negation of stones and straw and hay argument. He's on both sides, which is a problem. But then Rav Huna Breder Mishu Amar, So the Ravuna says, what are you talking about? How are you bringing us questions about from Tuma Vatara affect Shabbos? They're different categories. Shabbos, Filu Arniki Nami Mabatal Inchi. No, that's not valid because in regards to Shabbos, we allow you to do things that you wouldn't normally ever do in any other part of halacha, such as being mevatel a pouch full of money, right? So as in, since you can do bittul to a pouch full of money for Shabbos, so which you can't do for anything else, so therefore that's showing you that you can't really compare the two cases. So Shabbos is its own thing, and Tumah V'Tara is its own thing. Don't try comparing them. So then Ravashi responds a different way. Ravashi Amar, Karami. How are you questioning comparing a house versus a ditch? Right? You don't have to argue based on Tumah V'Tara versus Shabbos. You could say one's a house, one's a ditch. They're not the same thing. I understand a ditch because you normally would end up filling that in, right? Because you tend to either you leave them empty or you fill them in, like as in like they're not something that you normally one or the other. But nobody ever permanently deliberately fills in a house and and nobody takes their house like I know what we do with my house now. I'm going to fill it full of dirt. That's not a thing. So therefore, we can very easily differentiate between the cases. You can say that the case of filling it of use of batel for the ditch doesn't necessarily have to have anything to do with the way you use it for a house because they're simply that different. Whether because one's Tumah V'Tara and one's Ochel Shabbos, or because one's a house and one's a ditch. Okay, now we're getting to the bridge case. So let me just scroll back on up so we can. Again, so here's our nice ditch, right? So the Mishnah had us putting our ditch, nice simply right across like that. Okay, so now we're going to be dealing more with the exact details of that case, and we're going to be on the diagram over down here. Okay, so Natan alav neser shorochav arba amarava lo shano. Shanatan Larofbo, Aval Arko, Afilu Kolsha, Hunami, Hare Miato Miarba. When they're talking about the fact that it has to be 4 long, that is if you are trying to bridge the right, that has to be 4 wide, that's all right here. So the question is, how are you putting across the plank? Right? So if your plank is 4 by 4, right? So what does it have to be? It has to be 4, where does it have to be 4 by 4? It depends on how you're placing it. As you see here, if you're putting it, assuming that the ditch is exactly 4, you don't need to necessarily make this be 4 across. It only has to be 4 in one dimension. All right. Then over here, let's say if it's 4 tvachim wide, it's 4 tvachim again along the long way of the ditch, and only one, but therefore it's only 1 in terms of bridging the gap. That's sufficient because now the gap of the ditch is now only 3, so it doesn't serve to be a full partition anymore. Okay, so that's how we're solving that case. Okay, there we go. Flip over there. So that's the case of the ditch and how we're fixing it with the plank. And we're saying that it had to be 4 by 4. That's because they assume that you're starting with a plank that's covering you're trying to cross using that plank to do it in both directions, but not necessarily you always need it to be 4 by 4. All right, if it's 4 by 1 and you place it the right direction, that would also be sufficient. But you place that nice skinny plank the other way and try doing a bridge to get you across, it would not work. You wouldn't have made a sufficiently crossable area yet. Okay. Next to the Mishnah mentioned steak, you have 2 balconies opposite each other, and you want to connect them. So again, so that's over here. 2 balconies. Here 2 balconies. Picture above was here, and they're parallel to each other. question is it across the Shitzarabim or not across the Shitzarabim? We will, yeah, we'll leave that aside for now. You're trying to cross between two balconies. That's the main point. Okay, so what do you do? So, Amarava Hada Amar Zu Kneged Zu In Zu Shlo Kneged Zu Lo Vizu Lamala Mizu Nami Lo Amron Elash Yesh Behen Lola Zelazeh Shlosha Tzachim Abal In Ben Zelazeh Shlosha Uzra Akumahi. So there's a couple of limitations on our drawing of our placing of the bridges to the balconies. One is that the balconies have to be roughly parallel between the two. If they're not, then that creates a problem. And similarly, in terms of the angle that you're putting it at, also it can't be an angle of more than 3, or that'll also generate an issue. The deviation of more than 3 shvachim, whether it be in height or in terms of the direction of the bridge, that also is considered to be no good as well. That's considered to be a crooked gazustra, single crooked. Here, if the gap itself is less than 3, meaning is in, let's say the gap, we're talking about the gap in the physical gap between here and here. If this gap there is less than 3, we can apply Lavud and say it's just one poorly built one. But otherwise, we're saying that that has to be level and the same height when we're doing it, right? So if they are within 3 tvachim, let's say they're just between each other, then we can connect them via Lavud. And also we're saying that the maximum height difference also is 3 tvachim. Just the question is if let's say they're very far apart, then again, then that far apart, that's a problem. But let's say there's a difference of 3 and just to bring them pretty close together, then we just say it's a badly constructed one, but it's still a valid one. Okay. All right. Okay. Now we're on to the next Mishnah. Okay. And here's the more examples of how we're doing the drawing. Again, 3 tvachim in terms of distance between the two, and the width the other way, and whether or not that'll work or not. Okay. The next Mishnah. Okay. So we were talking about haystacks before. Well, here's our haystack. So, mat ben sheben shtei chatzerot gavoa star tvachim ma'arvin shtayim ve'in ma'arvin echad. 2 courtyards with a big haystack in the middle that's at least 10 tvachim tall. You have to make 2 areas. You can't join them together. Each of them can feed their animals for each side of it. But once you've managed to eat away at the hay, the hay wall efficiently, then you can make one Eruv again. Now you consider them to be connected. Right? Meaning, because once you eat away too much of the haystack, then it's no longer a wall, and therefore we're back to being one united courtyard. Okay. So Rav Huna said that we only allow you the both to feed it, assuming you feed it directly to your animals, and not that you take it from the wall and you put it into the animal's feeding trough. Wait, so does that mean that so that if you can't actually move the hay, are you allowed, like bring the animal to it and like make it eat right there? So Rav Huna said in terms of saying, are you allowed to do that? The answer is, you're even allowed to bring your animal outside and let it go graze on the grass on Shabbos. On the other hand, you're not allowed to put your animal on top of animals that are set aside on Shabbos. So we're kind of stuck. So rather, what are you doing? If you can't, because the haystack is muktzeh, because it's come designated as being a wall, therefore it's not valid, and it's designated towards both parties. Therefore, you can't move it yourself. So what are you supposed to do? If you can't literally bring it to it, rather, what do you do? Rather, you basically, instead of like pulling it. Do we have a picture here of how you pull your animal? No. Okay, fine. I'll just say it outside. Whatever. Basically, so instead of dragging your animal by the head to get to this nice haystack over here, rather you basically stand, and then like the animal's like trying to walk away, and you stand there, and then it's like you're in the way, and it goes the other way, and you just do it that way, as opposed to actually pulling the animal or pushing the animal. That way, you can get it there without ever actually having violated the issue of Rabbanan. So now we're going back to analyze the statement. Below Yitain Latol Kupato Tevin. Can you really not put it inside the basket of the trough? You just have to let it stay there on the giant wall. Tanya, didn't we learn in a Breita that Beit Shebein Shtei Chatzirot Milu Tevin Eruvin Chaim Aim Eruvin Echad? We learned in a Breita that if you had a house between two courtyards, and they decided to put all of their hay inside the house. You make two errors but not one. And then Zenotain Lotos Kupato Biachil. This one can take out hay from the house, put it in his basket. Zenotain Lotos Kupato Biachil. So each one can then take from the hay that's serving as a wall between the two courtyards and then feed the animals. And then once it gets below 10 tefachim, then you can't anymore, which seems to be a direct parallel to our Mishnah. So why are we saying that in our Mishnah's case that you can't put it into a basket to feed your animals? Which one is it? Okay, so Oza, Noel. What do we mean that you're allowed to use it? How does that work? So Noel et Beito, Babat Lashato, Hua Sor B'Chaver Mutar. So rather, what should you do? You should lock your house, give up your rights, then let the other person. And then the other person can feed the animal the way he wants to. Similarly, that's the case of the pit of hay between two Chomei Shabbos, that each of them would have to like lock the door and give up the rights in order for the person to be able to do so as well. Here we go. You can't both end up using it or you run into issues. Right, so each city would have to give up the rights to the stored area here, the 69. Until we're talking about the case, it's with this. We had our I guess we had a barn in the middle of some sort, so the storage building, or a normal building. We decided to turn into a barn for the week or two, for a couple of weeks, right? So that was a question of how you use it, and we said that in order to get one person to use it, each of them had to give up the rights to the other one. Similarly, if we had this a nice big haystack between two cities, each city would have to give up the rights alternatingly in order for either one to use it. Okay. So that's fine if you do that solution, but the full problem still remains. So I understand what you said before about being about giving up your rights and switching ownership and control, but in the Breita you quoted, it doesn't have any room for that. It says this guy takes and puts it in his basket to feed his animal, and the other guy does the same thing. It doesn't give any indication that we're doing any process in between the two actions. What's going on? So Amri, BAYT. No, the difference is because it's in a house. Kevan deika tikra imipra minkare le milta. The difference is that people will definitely notice basically it's all exerted rabbanan of the courtyard is posted in the house. In the courtyard, we don't let you both do so and start taking out and feeding your animal in such the normal fashion you would, because you might end up accidentally reducing the wall too much. That'd be a problem. Then you'd be answering both people inadvertently, but you still would. And people wouldn't notice when that happens because it's not that easy to guesstimate height. But when it's inside of a house and you have a reference point, much easier to tell when you've gone below the 10 tefachim, and therefore you won't make that mistake. And that's why we differentiate between the case of the haystack being in a house versus the haystack simply being in between the two courtyards. Okay, so again, between the two courtyards, you might, let's go up a little bit far here. So you can see here, right? So the difference between, the way the haystack looks here and a haystack looks over here, not that different, right? It still looks like a large haystack over, right? And you can't necessarily gauge precisely the height always, but on the other hand, over here, right? When it's in the house, you always have the reference point of the ceiling going on, so that makes it easier to tell the height, and therefore you're less likely to make a mistake of accidentally eating too much of the hay and ruining it for the courtyards. Okay. Okay, so now we're back to the Breita that nitmad hatev me'asar tvachim shnehen asarim. If the haystack had reduced below 10 tvachim on Shabbos, now both courtyards are unable to carry. Ha'asara shari. That implies it's exactly 10, then it is. That means even if it's exactly 10, that would be enough. This is even though the ceiling is much higher than the 10, we still say that's considered to be enough for purposes. We learned that in general, if we have a mechitza, even if it doesn't reach the ceiling, it's still considered to be a valid mechitza. So this is why we can all be very thankful that we can save on our construction costs, and we don't need to make sure that every wall in a residence has to go all the way up to the ceiling. Also helps us out with our mechitzot in our shuls. We don't have to make sure that they hit the ceiling. It's okay if they don't. Yeah, that was a joke. It's not actually relevant whatsoever. For more on that, please ask Rabbi Kropkin on how Eruvin, on how mechitzot for shuls work. It's very little to do with anything to do with Eruvin and the laws we're learning about. Okay. So, okay. Amar Abaye. So, Abaye said, Hacha b'bayit shlosh asar, asar ma'ashu askinan v'teven asar. So then we've got another little monkey wrench here that Abaye says, what is the case? We're talking about the case where the ceiling is 13 tefachim minus a little bit, and then the hay is 10 tefachim tall. So therefore, that means we're no longer. That means it's not saying that every single case it's okay if the walls don't reach the ceiling inside of a house. It's only helpful if you can apply Loveland. Rav Huna braid Rav Yehoshua Amar. Then Rav Huna, son of Yehoshua, responds back. Then he's like, what are you talking about? If that's the case, then who needs the wall to be 10? If it's 7 and a little bit, we can apply love, and it would also work the same way. So why are you saying? Why are you putting the chumras in both directions? Like, what are you doing? So, right? So according to Abaye, well, is it just the language of the Breita better because it says it has to be at least 10? El Rav Huna braid Rav Yehoshua Mayasara. So according to Rav Huna braid Yehoshua says that it could even be 7 and it could be 7 and a little bit as long as the walls is in 10. What does that mean? Is that Torah? It means no. That the point is that if it is reduced from less than the law, less than when it has the word 10, it meant that even if it's removed less than 10, as long as even if it's technically less than 10, it's still not necessarily no longer it'll be considered 10 because love would would make it considered to be 10. Okay, now we're back. So now we're explaining the we're continuing in the right to the question again. We had a proper again. The haystack was tall enough. Then all of a sudden, then on Shabbos gets too far reduced. No, we say then Shtei Mesurim both are then unable to carry. So now Shlamina Diur and Abayim b'Shabbat Asurin. So shouldn't this teach us also that if somebody new comes on Shabbos who was included in the Eruv, that it's forbidden to carry anymore? Oh no, Dilma de Imat Matmel. No, that's not a good answer. The reason why we said about the wall being reduced, we say it's no good whatsoever, is because it's possible that this hay was reduced yesterday already. It's only noticed now. That's why I say it's different. All right, so yeah, so we're not worried. So the worry is that the original walls are no good. And when Shabbos came in, but we're not bothered by the fact that somebody who wasn't here on Shabbos before shows up now. That's really the worry, is because you might have only noticed it now, even though it really had been earlier. Okay. So now we're continuing back on in our BAYT from earlier. The question of what to do if we have an issue, if we have a conflict of interests, usage rights, and it's currently forbidden. What do you do? So, okay, so what's that? No, he locks his house and he gives up his rights. Wait, why do you need both? How they come are? Oh no, no, you should do either. Either he locks his house, therefore he's and therefore he gives him his rights, or he gives him his rights. Why does he need to do both? No, the issue is why do you make him do both locking his door as well as doing an active bittul reshut? Because if he normally uses the area, for all we know, he might come to use the area, and we don't want him to make that mistake, because we consider that to be because if you normally use the area, you might make a mistake, so therefore we make you do both to make you be extra careful. So now, if we're not done, so who asur b'chaver mutar, then he is forbidden to use it, but the other guy can. Isn't this obvious that if he can't use it, the other one can, because there's only two of them. So no, lo tzricha. Dehadar idach ubat gilei lechavrei hakmashmalan de'emivatlen chazr mevatlen. No, you do need it because it's teaching you that you're allowed to. What happened is that before that, his friend had done the bittul, so we're telling you that you're allowed to actually do multiple rounds of bittul. All right, sorry, I read that backwards. So the Beit is saying that you cannot do that. Rather, you have to do it only one direction. That's what this Beit implies: is you only have one person give up the rights at a time. Meaning, once you give up your rights once, that was it. You can't do it twice. You can't do mevatel and then mevatel again. Okay. Now we're back to the case. Let's scroll down here so we have more front and center. So we're told now we were dealing primarily with these cases. Now we're back to the case of there's a case stack between two cities right on the borderline. Pshita, isn't it obvious that they can both use it? Lo, Shricha, Rabbi Akiva, Dalmar, Tchumen, Doraita. So rather, this is according to Rabbi Akiva, whose opinion is that all Hilchot Tchumen are Doraita. The one which is as an Amor is Doraita. So Madatema, Ligzor Dilma Ate Leflufe. Kamash Milan, no, you may have thought that we're worried that we won't let you do this bittul because maybe the two different cities will get confused and they'll end up using it improperly. No, so rather instead we conclude that you don't need to do that, and we trust that they will not get confused. Okay, now we have a new Mishnah. We will I'll go to like 10 and then I'll give a sum up. Okay, let's see what we can get done. Okay, so case I'm stopping my mavoy. Okay, so how do you do if she took mavoy? Okay, so I guess we don't need this picture anymore. This is not going to be helping us much anyways. Okay. So how do you shoot a mavot? So you place down the barrel filled with the food. Omer hare zu l'chol b'nei mavoy. Zaka lehen aidei b'no ubito ha'gedolim b'aidei avdo v'shifchato ha'ivrim aidei ishto. So what would you do is you have all the food, again, you have enough food for everybody who's going to be involved in the sheet of Mavot, and then you give it to either your son or your daughter who are adults, meaning over the age of 12 or 13, and or even to your maid servant or your male servant, as long as if they're Jewish, and or to your wife. It only works if they are adults and not considered to be their hands exactly like your hands. So that's why it's no good to give it to your children who are not yet have not come of age, or if you were to give it to your Canaanite servant or maid servant, because they're considered to be basically an extension of you. Therefore, because in order to be a zakat somebody else, you have to hand it to somebody else in order for that to work. Right. So you have to mizaka, you have to be transferring it via a second party to somebody to the rest of them. You can't do it. It's an act that you cannot do on your own. Okay. So again, this is the way we do. So the concept of zikui will be done. It's basically for all Eruvs that are involving people who are not currently there and didn't actually contribute to it. This is a person who is doing this on behalf of others. That's why it's doing zikui. Okay. So now the question is the technical parts of how do you do this zikui, right? How do you gain rights for others by doing so? Amar Rav Yehuda, Rav Yehuda says, in order to do this, the barrel has to be the number two has to be able to lift it one tefach off the ground in order for it to be considered to be a proper zikui, a proper transferring of usage. So, sorry for lack of English words for it, but I'm not sure there's a good translation for being mizaka. Okay. I think a better one. I'll let you know. Okay. Again, so you're taking it. Okay. Again, tomorrow I'll put a better translation. I'll give it to everybody. I'm just not satisfied with what I've seen. Okay. So mizaka, again, you're taking the item on behalf of everybody else. So Amar Rabba Hani Tarte Meili. I learned there's two things from the elders in Pumadita. I learned this about lifting it up the tefach. And the other thing I learned is that Hamakadesh im ta'am malo halugma v'yatsa v'imlav lo yatsa. The other thing I learned is that if you person who's saying kiddush, you need to have drank a malo lugma, the majority of a cheekful, in order to have been Yotze Kiddush, and if you did not, then we're not Yotze Kiddush. So, and now we're going to go into a whole bunch of things about what the people learn from the people of Medita. So, from their elders. So, Amar Chaviva, Hani, Nam, Unami, Savet, Medita, Rinu, Damar, Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Asosti, Madur, Lachaya, B'Shaba. I also learned from them that you can make a bonfire for a woman who in childbirth on Shabbos. So this is saying for a woman in childbirth, yes, but maybe not for a general sick person. We say this is the case for, again, when it's rainy, yes, and they'll need the heat, but not otherwise, that's not the case. Again, for more on that, whether or not that changes or not, that's a different sugya in Shabbos, so we will not get into that whole sugya right now. So Ikmar, Amar Rav Chia Barabin, Amar Shmuel, Hikis at Dam and somebody had got their bloodletting, and then now they're growing cold. Rechia says, but that it's in case of nefesh, right? So somebody had bloodletting, now they're getting cold, which implies they bloodlet too much. Then you make them bonfire on Shabbos, even if it's the middle of the summer, as hot as it can be, because it's dangerous, and I want to make sure that he doesn't die. Therefore, saying that there is no limitation on making a bonfire for a pregnant woman versus a sick person. It's the same thing. It's going to be helpful to do it. Amar Amemar Hanami Sabet Tubita Renu Bigmar Ezu Asher Astam. They also learned about them. What is considered to be a share tree, meaning a tree used for idolatry? Amarav Kol Shakomrim Shomrim Ota Ain't Tamin Big Parata. This is whenever you see the priest guarding it and that they won't eat it. That implies that this is an idolatrous tree. Shmuel Amar, and Shmuel says something about how do you know if something is considered to be an idolatrous tree? Go into Omri, as if they're saying the following words: Hani Tamri l'Zichron to Beit Nitzrafi Deshatalei b'Yom Chagam. These dates are the year for the temple of Nitzrafi, which they drink on the day of their festival, right? So if they say that this is the tree we harvest from for our worship our God on a given day, that's clearly an Asherah tree. It's a tree designed designated for this purpose, which makes it an Asherah. The Amr released and then Amir says, yeah, and so Medita told me exactly what Shmuel just said. So that's what the elders of Medita have told us. Okay. Now, quick sum up of what we've covered. I'll do most recent, and then I'll go back to the beginning. So we the last week included a whole bunch of interesting phrases about we learned from the elders of Medita that they taught us. We mentioned Zichron, we're going to get to that primarily tomorrow, so don't worry about that. On how you can make everybody have access to the food for the Eruv, even if they didn't necessarily contribute from the outset to do so, or for the Shitov. Then but the primary discussion we discussed today was again differentiation between two areas by means of a ditch or by means of a bridge. Again, there being a gap below the ground opposed to above the ground. Question: how do you bridge it? We also discussed cases of again filling in with hay versus with dirt. Based on whether or not you are mevatel properly or not. You do tend to leave it there, or you not need to leave it there, and how that can make a difference, whether it be for our purposes in Shabbos. We said that that's the difference, is whether it's meant to be there or not. Compare that with the case in Tumat oil and how that works. And we said that even though it seems to contradict, that's okay, because Shabbos and Tumat B'Tara are different things, so we could do them differently. Or you could say, because one's talking about a house, one's talking about a ditch. And lastly, we're talking about the bridges between, more cases. So again, the general case of the balcony is how they're supposed to be roughly level with each other. If they're not roughly level with each other, then that's a problem. Again, if they're roughly level, then 3 tvachim, then it's as if they're straight. If they're more than that, that's a problem. Also, that the gap between the two is less than 3, then we can apply love it as well. And therefore, but otherwise, if they're too far crooked, or if they are different in height, then we say that you cannot make the bridge between the two of them. Then we discussed the case of the wall. Then we went to discuss the case of the hay wall. We discussed cases when it applies similar to that of the wall we discussed the past couple of days about having to be 10 tvachim tall, and we also mentioned that there's a difference between whether it's outside of the courtyard versus inside, because if it's outside, we're more concerned about you end up eating it too far down than we are with the case where it's indoors, because you'll be more likely to tell the difference. Then we also mentioned why we're more concerned with this type of wall being reduced than other types of walls being breached, because here we can't tell when it had been breached. And that's why we're more machmir in regards to haystacks than by other walls. And we also discussed the case of the haystack between two cities and how having access to both cities isn't a problem, even according to Rebbe Akiva's opinion. Okay, sorry if that's a big pass, but hopefully people followed, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Have a good day.
Have a great day.